Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Joseph. I hope everyone is doing well today. So, in today's video, I'm actually going to be looking at how to save door actions in a room. So this is the follow-on from the rooms and doors I made last week. And the idea of this one is we're going to get into a bit of my nightmare territory of dynamic saving systems in game, which is a real pain in the ass. Before I get going though, huge thank you to everyone on the channel. You guys are amazing. I can't say that enough. You guys have no clue. Let's get into the video. So, what am I talking about when I say dynamic saving systems? Let's look at this. So I haven't fixed the player. I will be very clear on that. But the process will be the same. So if I go around and I go and open some doors, as I did in my previous video, like so, there's not much that's changed, and I can still go from room to room. But what's changed now is if I go back to this room, you can see all the doors have remained open. And if I click on this door, for example, and go back through, you're going to see that the door stays active. Same in here. So the way this works is a bit of a nightmare. So what I've had to do to make this function is I need a zero room, a load room, so to say. And in that load room, I've got a room master because I couldn't think of a better name. All this object does is create me 3 arrays. It creates a room ID, a object ID, and an object door, which is basically where we store if the door's active or not. The reason we need these 3 is objects from room to room to room, as far as I'm aware, I haven't tested it, I'm making an assumption off the old Gamemaker here. If I have one object in one room, object in the next room, and an object in the next room, they'll all be granted the same ID. At least that's my assumption. I could be wrong. Let me know. So what we do is we create a room identifier that then identifies objects in that room. And we reference these 2 objects together to work out where we are. I'm going to show you how this works. So let's go into our objects here. So I've changed a little bit of the script. Oh, that's not needed. That was something I was testing and it did not do what I wanted it to do. So the way this works is all this is new code. And the way this works, and it does look a little daunting, but it is and it isn't. It's just how you think about problems. So the first thing I do is I actually do a check to say, do I find myself? And if I do, well, that is very poor spelling on my part. I'm going to leave it. Actually, no. And what I do in the program is if I do not find myself, I actually create an entry in the array. But the first step is we look at our room ID and we cycle through all entries in room ID. If I find an entry in room ID, so I say basically global array entry room ID, I find the room and we go, okay, we're somewhere here. The next step to this is we actually then check the ID array of all the objects throughout the whole system, because if we found a room, we should find an object ID within there that then gives us a return. And ideally, what we would maybe need to do is actually run these 2. So we need to do a check there and then a check underneath to say, do we find these at the same entry point? For this though, it will work. So once we find our room object ID and then our object ID, which in theory sit on the same entry, but we should double check things. We then go to our next step, which is we take our draw door. By the way, draw door is actually the active state. I totally forgot and spent half an hour debugging this for no reason. Which then looks at pulling in the state or stored information in that position that gets derived from the ID of the object, because I'm making an assumption. The next thing I do is I save a position point, for the lack of a better word, of the array, and then I'd say I found myself, continue. If this check fails, we then move to our second stage of our check, which is, as we don't see ourselves, we need to generate an entry for ourselves in the array. So the first step is found self is false. Now this is fine because we're in a create event, so it's not looping. Next thing we do is I just generate a temporary array length, which just pulls whatever number it is. And we just take the room array length and add it in. Next step we do is we add the room name. We then add the object ID, and then we add the door status. And at the end, we also pull the array entry position again. And that's relevant in the next step. Because we don't want to continuously need to be re-referencing this, we make our lives a little easier by pulling this component. What I mean by that is when I jump to my next part, so I had to change a little bit of script here. So in here, this is what's changed from the previous one other than the new code I've entered. The solid tag's actually been migrated out of here and into its own position, which what should have been done previously. More efficient code. Because otherwise we're resetting it and we create problems down the track. So this here, I reference the door activation array using my position, and then I just store the drawer, which is the activated state of the door. That's all I'm doing. But you can see I'm avoiding rerunning all this to then just do that. So that's why we do it that way. And that is the guts of the code. As you can see, it is a little convoluted, and I'm not 100% sure if this is 100% foolproof in the sense of the system not breaking down. It could break down. But like I said, if it does break down, it should then just be a matter of double checking both reference points in the same statement rather than separately. Okay, the next thing I'll show you is the debug. So the debug is semi-important in the sense of how we get our information. So when we're dealing in especially systems like this, we should be debugging very clearly on what we're trying to do. So I'm going to throw the debug into the room and you guys can see what the debug does. It's very simple yet very important. So if I load the debug in, you can see my first entry, if I go to my debug, will always be the array length of all the rooms. The next step in the debug is we get 3 entries of 0. Totally fine, we can use it as a reference point of array, which basically just indicates this is our entry of array. There's nothing fancy there. Our next one, room 1, which is this room here. We're in this room. We're going to pull object 0 or 168, which is one of these objects. I don't know which one. And we know the status is 1, meaning open. So this object is referenced to here, as you can see. And then if I go to one of these two, one of these values here should update. This one here. So you can see that it's tracking all our objects. Now if I jump to the next room and jump back in, you'll see my array's grown. And that's because all of these doors have now been entered into that array. So it will dynamically grow as the game goes on. So you could prune it later on down the track if you needed to. The way this works, so I'm just going to show you guys this little bit of what I think is clever array management, but that's me, that's my opinion. So we just run a for loop and we reference against the room ID and we just add to I, which is fine, that's how for loops work. And then in each of our draw steps, we can actually draw each component and then we increment our temp Y value, which then lets us format the drawing a bit more efficiently. So that is today's tutorial. A big thank you to everyone on the channel. You guys are all amazing. You know the deal by now. I'll put this up into the Google Drive. Feedback's always welcome. Any suggestions are welcome. And yeah, Discord's always open for a chat. You guys are amazing, and I will talk to you guys next time. See you later.